Good morning, everybody. My name is Jordan Shapiro. I'm a board member of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall Young Professionals. Thank you all for joining us today for the live stream on how fake news and conspiracy theories are driving political behavior around the world. So our speaker today is Christina Nemr. She's a director at Park Advisors, where she's responsible for managing projects at the intersection of disinformation and countering violent extremism. I'm happy that she could join us today to discuss her work in countering conspiracy theories and disinformation that we've seen rise a lot as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Christina, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jordan. Thank you for having me.
So without further ado, we're just going to jump right in. The mainstream terminology to talk about spreading falsehoods on the internet is fake news. You co-authored a report called Weapons of Mass Distraction, Foreign State-Sponsored Disinformation for the Digital Age. Can you explain how the phrase fake news describes or doesn't describe this phenomenon of disinformation that you discuss in the report?
Absolutely. Fake news has become this catch-all term to talk about all sorts of low-quality information. But because it is a catch-all term, it's a bit meaningless because the types of disinformation that I talk about in that report you reference encompasses so many different types of either manipulated information or information that's been taken out of context. I think one of the reasons that disinformation really does work, or even conspiracy theories, though the reason they resonate is that they're always based on a kernel of truth. And so it's that manipulation of the truth that then ends up making it disinformation. So disinformation can be outright something that is information that is outright false. It could be the mischaracterization of something that still has that element of truth to it. For example, if you take an old photo of a riot from, I don't know, the 90s, and then superimpose a new caption from today saying these rioters were out trying to open stores and businesses amidst COVID. So that's also a type of disinformation where it still was a true picture, just now being mischaracterized. It can also include doctored footages, photos and images. So I think we do need to break it down. Fake news, I don't think is a helpful term. I don't know that there's a better all-encompassing term. I think low-quality information is one that could help describe. But also, there's also an importance in differentiating between disinformation and misinformation, right? Disinformation being the willful pushing of false information, whereas misinformation is the inadvertent sharing of false information, which I think happens a lot online these days.
So who is creating these, doctored photos or low truth pieces of information?
It's a great question. These days, take your pick. It's everyone, honestly. It's everyone from state governments to individuals to organizations. Anybody that has an agenda to push is creating disinformation to push their own point of view. And you see it across industries. You see it from governments to healthcare to the environment. No sector or industry these days is immune from disinformation. Private sector companies are worried about any sort of rumor that goes on about the way their supply chains or any sort of nefarious connections they have that could drop share prices. So really, it's a problem for everyone. And I think it flourishes when you have uncertainty, which of course we do right now. But the concept of uncertainty when it comes to information really cannot be overstated. Humans, by their nature, so much of the psychological research shows that humans do not like uncertain times, right? They don't like issues or situations of ambiguity. We want answers. We want to understand what's happening. So when there's a vacuum of information, that's when you start seeing the rise of conspiracy theories. Any sort of answer that gives you that closure that you need, that satisfaction, that feeling of safe, being safe, is going to flourish during these times of uncertainty. So I think that's also why you'll see that certain answers that people push are very black and white, um, because it's meant to be simple. You're feeling uncertain. Here's a very simple answer that helps explain everything. And there's always that villain. There's a good and there's a bad. Any good story has both a villain and the hero. And you see that same thing in conspiracy theories.
Sometimes it can feel like we can't figure out what is true. And so then it becomes easy to take those solutions to uncertainty and decide that they are reality. But we also have the scientific method and rigorous testing that has given us an understanding of reality. It allows us to go to the moon and have computers and cell phones. So, for those of us who aren't experts on certain topics, how can we know what's true from what's false? And if we have methods to prove truth and prove the reality around us, why can't we just eliminate fake news from the internet?
That's a great question. I think a lot of this comes down to our us humans and our biases and our limitations in the way we process information. I think again, as humans, we're very tribal. We crave an identity. We crave a community. And in our search for that identity and community, we will then always seek out those sources of information that conform to our worldview, and again, make us feel like we belong and make us feel safe. So that unfortunately means that we're going to be in our own echo chambers. And the state of information today is that there are a multitude of sources where you can get your information. Gone are the vanguards of information, right? Anybody can be a publisher, anybody can put out a news article. And that also then means that you, as a consumer, can listen and read and take in whatever you want. You have platforms like Facebook and YouTube Beyond that, of course, have been at the forefront of helping to push out these streams of disinformation. But they are tools at the end of the day. They themselves have experimented with trying to inform users that, something that you interacted with was proven to be false. But the research shows that once something false has been pushed out, the damage is done. Everyone scrolls through, they read headlines. A lot of people don't even read beyond the headline before they share an article with their friends, with their communities. So the damage there is done. And some research shows that even after someone was informed that the article they shared was false, they still kept on sharing it. Because again, it's not even about the message itself. It's not about the facts. The facts, unfortunately, do not matter. It's about how it makes you feel. How does that communication make you feel? So this is also actually where the role of the media comes into play. If people are only reading a headline, I think it's very important then to make sure that that headline states exactly what the rest of the article might say. And there's no room for equivocation. If people are saying that vaccines cause death, then the headline shouldn't say some doctors say vaccines might cause death, and then others. It should be very clear about what the research and the science says. And I think sometimes journalists in they're rightfully trying to be balanced. But in doing so, I think, especially in these days, that helps create that, well, we have this camp that says this, but then this camp says that. Let's see which one is right. There are times for that debate, and there are times we need to be a little more certain.
Do you think that there are new standards for journalists who want to be at the height of telling reality versus pandering to fake news or pandering to algorithms that could arise to help create more truthful headlines?
That's a great question. I know there are a number of initiatives, fantastic initiatives like First Draft News and others that are helping journalists sift through. Because again, there's just so much information coming at us, and they have the unenviable job of trying to inform the public, but also not even being sure if their news is getting out, because there are main news streams and you have fringe news streams, so it's very difficult. And I don't know that anyone has that panacea yet to, how do you make sure that people are taking in that high quality information? because there's actually the issue. The research, there's some research that shows that conspiracy theorists technically consider themselves to be critically thinking. You know how some people say, like, we need to increase critical thinking and, media literacy efforts, which we can get into later. But the research shows that conspiracy theorists actually already think they're thinking critically, because they believe that they took the time to not just read what mainstream media pushed, but then to go and examine other sources. And when you look at it that way, it's almost hard to argue against. You can't win. And more so, even if something's debunked, the conspiracy theory is debunked, someone takes it down, Facebook takes it down, or whatever, that further proves in their minds, for a conspiracy theorist, that they were onto something, and that it was being discovered, and that's why they're trying to be silenced. There really isn't winning with someone who holds onto a belief that strongly.
It's pretty scary to think about, especially because, there is this idea that you're consuming information and that's changing your perspectives about certain issues. But it's a very big step to go from learning that maybe hydroxychloroquine might protect from COVID-19 and then actually taking that drug, or from believing that the hospital ship at the port of Los Angeles is not a hospital ship and then deciding that you're going to try to drive a train into it. How does this fake news then become action? Who is the person that's most susceptible to then taking the action from these conspiracies and from this disinformation?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it actually calls to mind the fact that even though some people might harbor or hold some views on a conspiracy theory and might believe it to be true, the vast majority of people will never act on them by any means. But there's some research that shows that those that do might consider themselves, there's like this narcissistic thing at play where it's like they've identified an issue and they alone can save the world against it. So there's some issues there with people kind of taking that quest for adventure and need to assert themselves. But again, more research shows that there is a bit of a correlation between those who have that. Well, I guess to take a step back, going back to the idea of uncertainty and our ability to deal with it. Some of us are better at dealing with this, and some of us are not. And for those of us who are not good at dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty, they might be more prone to taking action on it, because again, they need some of that closure so badly. But it's still something that's being researched.
So for my last question, before we start taking audience questions, and audience, if you haven't added a question into the chat box on the control panel, now is your time. Christina, the pandemic has already affected US elections. Wisconsinites braved the pandemic to vote in person due to an under evidenced narrative that voting by mail increases election fraud. And firing back this week, California announced that it will be sending every voter a vote by mail ballot for the presidential election in November, which just this week as well, Jared Kushner has alluded to discussions that the presidential election might be delayed entirely. What are your predictions for how disinformation will play into the election results, especially as COVID-19 is the mist or the fog over all these discussions? And what about whether the election will take place at all?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see some of that groundwork being laid in terms of talking about people questioning whether we can mail in our votes, whether it is an effective way, whether it's even a valid way. There will always be those forces that will try to delegitimize a course of action leading up to it. So you're already seeing those camps fall along those lines. Even the mere act of wearing a mask or not has become politicized. And I think, unfortunately, that is the sad reality of our polarized nature, where politics reflects society. And so we're in our own camps. and we're filtering in through our own sources. So I do think that there is going to be a debate as we near the elections. I don't want to make any predictions as to whether or not they will be postponed. I do think mail-in voting is an absolutely great option, and I hope that is something that we can all do. But at the same time, you're definitely starting to see those conspiracy theories converge along partisan lines, and they're hitting on the election as well.
It's very interesting, and we're all going to be waiting with bated breath to see what progresses. So I believe that Jessica is going to join us now and read some of the questions that have been submitted via the GoToWebinar control panel. If you do have a question for Christina, feel free to submit it as soon as possible. And please make the questions concise, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So Jessica, we're going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jordan. Christina, so we've got quite a few questions coming in. Can you speak to how dangerous deep fakes are or will be on the fake news phenomena?
Sure. There's actually been a lot about deep fakes. I think because it's just an interesting topic, right? The ability to alter a video to make it do what you want. There have been some really funny instances of it. But actually what we're seeing now is that the entire phenomenon might be a bit overstated because we're primed to now be aware of deep fakes. Some of the writing of late has said, well, first of all, the technology isn't fully there, right? So it's still a bit easier to tell that something has been played with. Some people have been calling them cheap fakes, the ones that aren't quite, like Hollywood style doctored yet, where you can tell something is on, like that Nancy Pelosi video where her speech was slurred has been called an example of a cheap fake. So all this to say, while I think a lot of people have focused on deepfakes, I don't think we haven't yet seen their implications. I don't know that we will yet because, again, the technology hasn't really gone up to speed. Plus the fact that we are primed for it, which by the way is a good and bad thing. Being primed to be aware of something makes you think critically every time you see an image or a video, like, is that doctored, is it not? But then that could also go a little too far to the extreme where you start just questioning everything, which is never good. But for now, I don't think that deepfakes are going to be that much of an impact, for at least for the next year or so.
Thank you so much. Where do you get your news, and how do you discern what is truthful and what is more opinion or a particular narrative to persuade a reader to think one way or another?
Yeah, that's a great question. I personally get my news from Twitter, my main source, because that's where I follow all of the news outlets and the journalists that I'm interested in, that I know produce high quality reporting. So, and that's also where, you can follow all sorts of organizations, scientists, things like that. So Twitter has been great for me personally. Sorry, what was the second part of that question?
How do you discern between what is narrative or what might be pushing towards a particular, getting the reader to think a particular way?
Yeah, that's one of the first things that people tell you when they're encouraging media literacy is to tell you to slow down. There's a deluge of information out there. It's coming at us from all sorts of angles on our phone, so many apps, email newsletters, things like that. And so instead of reading something and immediately reacting because either it made you feel good or it made you angry, I think being in tune with our emotions is the first and foremost, and that's what some of the literature will say. Take a back, slow down, think about what is this message trying to make you see or feel? Why do you feel that way? Is it confirming your already held beliefs? Is it attacking them? And one of the main ways, if you do want to try and change someone's belief or change their opinion on something, is to not attack the belief, and certainly not to attack the person, but to approach them with empathy and with kindness. Never insult someone whose beliefs you're trying to change.
Thank you. As a follow-up on your Twitter comment, do you think that platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter should be deciding what is fake news or disinformation? How do we ensure that their incentives aren't manipulated as well?
Oh yeah, that is a great question. And unfortunately, we are relying on them and their judgment for those decisions right now. There's no right answer here. The fact of the matter remains that the platforms are disincentivized to remove disinformation, fake news. At the end of the day, they make money off of clicks, and the best way to get someone to click on an ad or anything is just to evoke outrage and get them feeling excitement, rage, whatever. So they definitely do not have that financial incentive. Of course, as more people start turning away from them because there's this deluge of disinformation, fake news, that might get them to act as they realize that they've lost, that public opinion. And I know there's been plenty of news articles coming up about what they are trying to do. They rightfully will say they don't want to censor and they don't want to be determining what's free speech and what's not. And I will say it is a hard topic. Anyone that tells you this is easy and here's how you do it is absolutely lying to you. It's not easy. People have been talking about this when it comes to terrorist propaganda online, which can be actually a little bit easier than disinformation. And again, people have been trying to take lessons from child exploitation and abuse online, which again is even easier because you know what it is. It is what it is. But for disinformation, it's just truly not an easy topic. And so the platforms themselves, they are grappling with it. I have plenty of former colleagues who have gone over to help you work at that policy. But I mean, just today, YouTube on one hand might say, we don't want to censor anything. But then there's an article that came out today saying that on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, YouTube, which by the way is banned in China, removed and censors certain phrases that the CCP does not like. So there's always this back and forth between them.
Thank you so much. Does the level of education or political party affiliation influence the acceptance of conspiracy theories?
No, from what we've seen and what the literature has said, it does not. What actually influences that more than anything else is it's a more psychological aspect. And again, and this is why I love the concept of uncertainty, and this is why you can't overstate it. It comes back to our own cognitive biases. The more uncertain you are and the more insecure you feel, the more you will grasp out at anything that gives you some sort of answer. And unfortunately, conspiracy theorists are going to be right there to hand you that really easy, black and white, simplistic answer. And so that is where you're going to see more people being susceptible.
Thank you. In some countries, disinformation on social media has sparked riots, massacres, and other calamitous behavior. How can governments provide security while balancing free speech concerns when the sources of disinformation are so hard to pin down and platforms to diffuse?
Yeah, that's a great question, because especially it's on each government to provide for the security of their people. And yet when we talk about disinformation, the battlefield is not with them, it's with the private sector. So, and it's like the two shall not meet almost. We're seeing a lot of coordination these days between the platforms like Facebook and governments. But if you look at the case of Myanmar, for example, the genocide that happened there weren't, Facebook had moderator, I think a few moderators, but maybe two that spoke the language. So they are obviously focused on the West, and they need to be looking globally to understand each context. I know Facebook just put together this new board, which is going to act like a Supreme Court of sorts. A lot of people are kind of not sure how effective it will be. I know it's going to look at each case after the fact, but the board itself, I think it currently has 20 people. Only 5 of those folks are from the US, and then the rest, there's one from 15 other countries. But for example, India is represented by one person on that panel. India has hundreds of millions of Facebook users. So it's that kind of, they need a lot more expertise that helps them understand how their platform is being used in that particular country.
Thank you. You founded the CVE program at the Bureau of Counterterrorism at the US State Department. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and also how it relates to disinformation?
Sure. So yeah, I was one of the founding members back when I joined the State Department, the Countering Violent Extremism program, which for those of you who may not be familiar with the term, CVE for short, it's exploring, I suppose, the soft side of counterterrorism. So it's not the kinetic. It's not understanding and killing terrorists. It's trying to understand what drives someone to join a terrorist group to begin with. What are the motivations? What are the factors that led that person to go down that route? So in a way, it's a very empathetic way of understanding these groups and how they motivate individuals. So the reason actually I enjoy kind of looking across the board and seeing the similarities between countering violent extremism and countering disinformation is because well, first of all, I just love the psychological aspect of it. What motivates people? Why do we do what we do, especially for nefarious aims? But at the end of the day, there is this need for belonging, this desire for adventure, or the wanting to belong to something and have that identity help shape who you are and how you think of yourself and your standing. That's on a very personal level. And then, of course, around you, there's always those external factors. How do you think your government is performing? Do you feel as like you are cared for as a citizen? Do you feel like your human rights are being respected? There are so many different factors that play into, why someone might choose to join a terrorist group. But again, taking it back to that psychological level, it's when you are searching for meaning, when things are uncertain around you, that you will take certain information that's tailored for you at face value. And, that information might lead you down a wrong path.
Thank you. How are extremist groups using disinformation to further their aims, and how successful have these groups been?
Well, some examples, there's some violent extremist groups that are saying that COVID is just another example of how the West is going to suffer. That COVID is one of the littlest soldiers, I think, as one group in Africa put it. But there are all sorts of ways that violent extremist groups will use this time of uncertainty. I think there are some neo-Nazi groups that were encouraging their members to go out. This was back in like March, to start, licking things at the grocery store to help spread, and that this was the time to be taking over, and the fall of government. So there's always going to be those fringe groups who will rise to take advantage of the chaos. And again, the fact that nobody has an answer. So there's an uncertainty that gets exploited, and they all rush in to try and claim some stake.
Thank you. To what extent do you believe the focus on individualism in American society, combined with escapism into a digital world, play into society's collective susceptibility to misinformation and tendencies to not think critically?
It's a good question. I think that is a problem. If you were to talk about, when was the last time the U.S. was truly united? It's hard to think of that time. Right now, I would say, I think a lot of people would say, we're very polarized, we're very divided, we're all getting information from different sources. So when was the last time we were united? Arguably, one might say maybe we were united the last time we had a global threat. During the Cold War, it was easy to unite Americans and say, we have to unite as one society. There's a threat outside, an outside threat actor that we need to be aware of. And some say maybe that's what's needed now, and that in times of polarization, one way to get people to come together is to make them understand that there is a shared threat that we all need to work against. But I think that does have implications then. The fact that we are divided means that we will never be able to coalesce around a single solution. We'll never get people to understand, vaccines will help. So it is absolutely a problem. I think one of the questions would be, how do you recreate a unified situation or context in today's day? At what point will you ever get to sit down with folks across all, socioeconomic strata, across all walks of life? When do you get to talk across board to each other? I think one of the easiest ways is in schools, in public schools. But you know, we can get that. That might be a larger discussion. But what is the state of our public school system? Another way is maybe, you know, through the military, through the draft. Who does now? Who? Not to say there should be a draft. I'm saying who actually now joins the military. It's hard to figure out where is the best way to get everyone and reach everyone at the same time. I don't think anyone has any easy answers because, like the question said, everyone's escaped into online. Now we're all getting our own sources of information. So it's actually a question I would put back to the group. Where can we reach each other at the same time? One actually could say that COVID was a unifying force globally, but then that quickly devolved into, as expected, all the different camps.
Thank you. Has 24/7 cable news hindered how informed we are? Also, does the pressure to put out news 24/7 mean that they fall into questionable vetting and editing practices that contribute to the fake news accusations?
Yeah, the 24/7 news cycle is not great, but at the same time, if you actually look at the demographics and who's watching, I think that might be a bit of the older generation. So it's not a great thing, but younger generations are not getting their news from cable news to begin with. So that might not be as big of an issue. And then, sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Sorry, when they have to put out news 24/7, does that cause issues with vetting and editing that can contribute to the fake news accusation?
I think there definitely is. Again, journalists have this unenviable job to take in all this information, put it out. That's why, you know, certain tools are needed, right? You need to be able to quickly verify that a photo or a video hasn't been doctored, and there are a few tools out there that help journalists do that. And I think this quickness is not great for the pushing out high quality information. But I also think that there's also there's this element of, or I suppose I wish that the media would also take a step back, the same way that information consumers ourselves should take a step back and say, you know, do we need to breathlessly report on this particular thing, this particular conspiracy theory or this story? Because you can also inadvertently amplify and something that would have never gone viral, or that, you know, the rest of the world would have never heard about, rightfully so, because, you know, something should just remain on the fringe. So I do sometimes see a story about something and think to myself, why did anyone even have to write something about it? Let's just let it die. Let's not give it any sunlight.
Thank you. Where do younger people get their news?
A lot of people are just getting them online. So there's any number of platforms like Twitter. A lot of people get their news from Reddit. A lot of people get their news. There's a subgroup of folks getting their news from Snapchat, which has news channels as well. And then, you know, I think I said YouTube, but there's a whole host of information sources, a lot of them online.
Thank you. Can you talk about what you know of the actual mechanism by which Facebook monitors for fake news and vets the decision to delete the item?
I wouldn't be able to get into the details. That it's something that they, I mean, Facebook, I will say, all the platforms, they do a lot. They don't always share what they're doing, but they certainly are working on the topic. But I would not be able to speak into any internal processes. All I can say is from, you know, what we've seen, what they've pushed out, and that is it's a combination of both AI and then human moderation. So their AI will flag something that might have been flagged in the past or has been already debunked or proven as fake. And then they have a layer of human moderation as well, wherein any flag post will go to the human moderator who decides whether or not this is indeed something that needs to be taken down or not. In fact, some of the news articles that have come out of late have been talking about, because of COVID and the fact that everyone now has to work at home, Facebook and others have lost some of their human moderators, the inability to interface with them. So that's why maybe some of you have noticed that the moderation has gone down or decreased in quality. But this is also what I believe their board, their new board, I forget the name, is supposed to do. It's if a post of yours gets flagged, gets taken down, you will then have the ability to appeal. And it is to this new board that the appeal will go.
Thank you. What news organizations have an editorial policy not to color the news?
Not to color the news?
Yes.
That's a great question. I would not be able to speak on that.
Fair enough. This will be our final question. I think Jordan might have a couple of extras. So I'll turn it back over to her. Some countries and the UN have recognized that hate speech can cause violence and is banned. Don't we and other countries have enough problems already?
Yes, we do. But sorry, what was the question exactly?
Sorry, so UN and other countries have already determined that hate speech can be dangerous and have banned it.
Got it.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so the question is, why don't we just ban it?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Well, I agree. We certainly have enough issues, and it would be nice to be able to do a blanket ban of hate speech. The problem is defining hate speech and being able then to identify it in every instance. Hate comes in all different ways. There are ways that you can actually push hate without the broader public being aware, but because I know that something's very personal to me, I know that is hateful. Or certain sub communities have their own language, and hate groups are also have gotten pretty good at evading any sort of censors that might be picked up, right? So they'll frame something a different way. I mean, just to give you a different example, but you may have heard about this pandemic video that went around, or has been going around for the past 2 weeks. The pandemic video was flagged and taken down by Facebook, YouTube, and others, but then it keeps cropping up. People keep posting it and then are very careful to change the name, change the tags, so it doesn't get caught by the censors. So again, it's a noble cause, but when it comes down to the practice of actually identifying, defining hate, it is a mammoth task.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thanks to the audience for asking so many really great and interesting questions. This topic has so much breadth. So I wanted to bring it home with just a few more questions to Christina, a little bit about, what can we do? Are there solutions out there? So you mentioned that Facebook is starting to, it has its Supreme Court of information regulation, and Facebook just this week said that they were going to flag posts that spread disinformation around COVID-19, and it even dismantled an Iranian disinformation campaign. But still Facebook has not backed down on deciding that they would allow all types of political ads, whether or not they have disinformation or not. So I'm wondering, what are the implications for social media picking and choosing what types of dis and misinformation are permitted on their platforms?
Yeah, they definitely do not want to be in that role. They don't want to be the arbiters, but the fact remains, and what they won't accept is that they already are, and that by choosing to censor some things and not others, they are then taking a stand, whether they like it or not. So this is certainly one of those things where I wish they would be a little more focused. Around COVID, when it first started, all the platforms immediately jumped to action. Because again, when COVID first started hit, before you knew the inevitable disinformation was coming, there was like a glorious week where everyone was just, hunkered down, paying attention, kind of, scared. We were all in it together. And the platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and others, they were fantastic, just immediately pulling down anything that didn't make sense. And in that moment, those of us who work on it were wondering, wow, look how quickly they jump to action. Why can't they do this normally? Why can't they quickly pull down an ad that is spreading, what are demonstrably false statements? So again, they make these choices every day, even though they claim that they don't want to, but they are. One solution that some have put forth is that, in terms of, what are the solutions for the platforms? They do need to take action. Some have called for regulating them. But that also brings all sorts of issues of regulating the companies. But one proposal that's been put forth is, what if the regulations were put on companies for the algorithms they build that push information forward? So YouTube has gotten a bit better at this, but there's plenty of articles that came out last year and before, how if you watched, you could start off with a perfectly innocuous video on YouTube, and then fast forward 4 or 5 videos later, it was showing you like neo-Nazi propaganda or something like that, just because it got more and more extreme. So some have said, why don't we just then regulate them on the way they build the recommendation algorithms, which actually I think is a viable idea.
You mentioned that this is sort of a moment of coming to head between the private sector and the public sector, that the government is in charge of protecting us, but that the private sector is the one that's making these algorithms and making these decisions. What is stopping politicians from pushing regulations further along these issues?
That's a good question. I think the first part would be, I don't think they fully understand the way these tech companies work. So there is that misalignment with understanding how technology also works. So that probably stops them. There might be some also issues, conflicts of interest, financial conflicts of interest perhaps as well. It's tough to tell, but I do think the primary reason is that they simply do not understand it.
So perhaps maybe we need a little more tech literacy in different governments.
Well, that's actually a great point. Tech literacy is definitely needed. We need politicians who understand, who are making policy and have the 21st century skills to be able to make relevant policies. But by focusing so much also on the platforms themselves, we also can get a little off course, because technology is just a tool at the end of the day. It's either good nor bad. It's the way us humans use that technology that then, takes it all sorts of different ways. And, if we focus so hard on, what Facebook is doing right now, we're going to miss down the line that Facebook is going to be irrelevant in a few years. People already, younger generations are not using Facebook anymore. So it's more about understanding how humans are going to use the tools coming than really focusing on the tools we have right now.
With everything moving so fast, it's hard to predict the future. So I just have one more question, and then we will close it up. So thank you so much for answering everybody's questions. And again, thanks to the audience. So for the $1 million question, when we see our friends and family members spreading things that we know are demonstrably false on the internet, I'm sure many of us have engaged with these people and said, hey, maybe this isn't right. Here's some correct information. Or maybe we ignore it because it's scary to engage with something that could potentially be hateful with trolls online. What can those of us who really want to see truth prevail do when we see things that are mis or disinformation across social media, or even just in a conversation with family members?
That's a great question, Jordan. I think the first step is to approach it with empathy and understanding, and trying to understand why. Why is someone latching onto this particular conspiracy theory? What is it about them that resonated with them is the first step. And then, of course, the second step would be approaching them in a neutral fashion, not bashing them, not calling them stupid or making them feel like an idiot. But again, approaching them with that compassion to say, I've seen that, and I can see why it resonated, especially right now. No one knows what's happening. But I also saw other research that says this, and it actually, helped change my mind. So I think that by framing it, by validating them, you always want to validate people and make them feel seen and heard. And then, introducing, once you have them in that safe environment, introducing the new, hopefully higher quality information.
Thank you so much. And again, just thank you so much for sharing all of these insights with us. I know that everybody out there is trying to be as up to date on news and the virus and everything as possible, and being able to know how to discern truth and then also spread truth is so vitally important to all of us. Do you have any last words that you'd like to say to the audience?
It's been a pleasure being here with you. Thank you for the wonderful engagement and the questions. And this definitely is a topic where there are no answers. And so I hope we can all put our collective minds together and try to figure it out.
Thank you to everybody for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about disinformation, or if you'd just like to continue the conversation, the Council is going to be hosting a talk on truth decay with the RAND Corporation at the end of this month on May 29th. You can learn about that event and more in the handout that is currently linked in the control panel on the right side of your screen. And you can also visit our website for more details on future events and information about how to join the Young Professionals, which is the part of LAWAC and Town Hall that I am a part of. If you want to support LAWAC and Town Hall further, please visit our website as well, and that's lawacth.org. I know that's a mouthful, I'll say it again, lawacth.org. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope that you stay safe, stay informed, and have a great weekend.